Hello everybody. We have talked about the importance of intercultural communication. We have talked about the importance of communication in business. We have talked a little bit about international communication. Now today I want you to start thinking about some other things about communication. We will talk about communicative competence. Competence, which means effectiveness, how effective you are, and we will discuss competence today and in the next lecture. For revision purposes, I want you to keep these 3 points in mind throughout the lecture today. I want you to remind yourselves of Berlow's SMCR model, which is the sender, message, channel and receiver model, and I want you to constantly think in the back of your mind. I want you to have the importance of context in the transmission of messages. I also want you to remind yourselves of the significance or the reasons for intercultural communication in business and why is it important. And I also want you to think about what makes us different from each other, because these 3 things have a bearing on how competent we are perceived as communicators. The bottom line for any student of management, especially any student of business management, is that the key to good management is knowing what is fundamental to success and what is not. A very straightforward sentence that was given by Scott Adams, the originator, the creator of Dilbert Comics, as I told you last time. This is the punchline for any management student. Okay? A good manager just goes out and gets the job done with as optimal and as ethical use of resources as possible. In addition to optimally utilizing our resources, we also need to be ethical. So these are the things, these are the goals of your courses in management, these are the goals of your courses in business, and I always want you to keep these in plain view. Okay? And in order to get your job done, you need to express yourself to people and make yourself understood by people who you may or may not share a background and common understanding with. Not only do you have to express yourself, you also need to make sure that you are understood by people, and that is where the word competence comes in. How effective you are, how competent you are, how skilled you are in expressing yourself and making yourself understood. We also talked about culture and what culture encompasses and how big culture can be, and we also talked about how deep rooted it is in our lives. So I want you to keep this definition in the back of your mind. I don't expect anyone listening to this lecture to remember this definition by heart. I don't. Even I don't remember this definition, but I just get a very good, very comprehensive understanding of what culture is through this definition. We talked a little bit about international communication. International communication, the title of this course deals primarily with communication across geopolitical boundaries, and intercultural communication is an integral part of any kind of international communication. Geopolitical boundaries are significant determinants in our perception of who we are and how we perceive the rest of the world. Okay? So this is a very, very important component, and that is why in this course I will be focusing largely on intercultural communication, especially in the Indian context, where every person you talk to could have an affiliation, or every second person you talk to, especially in a metropolitan city like Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, Ahmedabad, Bangalore, Hyderabad. So every second or third person you talk to could have an affiliation with a different state, and we as Indians see this. Many people outside our country are may or may not know this about our country, but we see that we are so different from each other, that the different parts of our state are very different from the other part. It's not a homogeneous society by a long shot. The ways, yes, in many states women wear saris, but the way they drape their saris is very different. In many states women wear salwar kameez, but what they call it, the colors they prefer are very different. The kinds of cloth they use to make their clothes is very different. The language they speak is very different. The kinds of food they eat is very different. Rice is the staple diet of many Indians, but the way we cook rice and what we eat the rice with is very different. We all have some form of dal or pulses or legumes in our food, but the way we cook those legumes or pulses or dal is very different even in the same state. So, in the mountain states like Himachal Pradesh that has 15 valleys, and every valley has its own culture, and every valley cooks dal in a different manner and they eat it with different kinds of food. So, we are a very, very heterogeneous society where everybody is following a different system of living. And yes, we are Indians, we are especially the Indians listening to this lecture would probably identify with what I am saying, that as Indians, yes, we have some common understanding of who we are and where we come from, but for the most part the way we do things are very, very different from each other, which is what makes this course very, very essential for all of us. So, that is why I will be focusing on intercultural communication to a large extent. And I had asked you to think about the fact that can communication in a business setting be anything but intercultural? And I will give you a hint for this, and that is that slide on the sources of difference. Just think of what makes us different from each other, and then think, at any point will you ever meet a person who thinks exactly the same way as you do? Probably not. Siblings in the same house, twins don't think alike, especially in a place like India where the kinds of exposure we have is so diverse. So, my take on this is that it's not really possible, especially in today's world where the boundaries are shortening. But I leave it to you to decide. Now, let us talk about communicative competence. According to Samovar and Porter, communicative competence is very closely linked to interpersonal understanding. It has a bearing on interpersonal understanding, and it is in turn affected by interpersonal understanding, and we will talk about this during the course of today's lecture. And interpersonal understanding is a function of similarity of perceptual orientations, systems of belief and communicative styles. So, it is a lot of things coming together. How we perceive our environment, what we believe about our environment, and how we communicate with our environment, which in turn depends on the feedback we constantly keep getting from our environments. So, it is not a linear thing, it is this mess of signals going back and forth between us and our environments, and that is what determines how we communicate, what we believe, what we feel comfortable with, what we don't feel comfortable with, who we like to interact with, who we don't like to interact with, how we perceive ourselves as communicators, or our definitions of understanding and competence and effectiveness. Backlund says that there are 4 components of competence. According to Backlund, competence could be linguistic, it could be the possession of competence, it could be related to contextuality, it could be related to appropriateness and accomplishment, and all of these things actually make up what competence is. So, just think about these things and we will discuss them in greater detail as we go along, and I will keep referring to these slides again and again. So, I want you to think about these slides and keep them in your mind when we talk. Today, I will talk to you about interpretive competence. Now, according to Trenholm and Jensen, perceptual processes people engage in before, during and after social interaction are as follows. We engage in 4 perceptual processes when we interact with our environments, with people in our environments. The first perceptual process, the first process that we really think about is we identify what the situation is. What is happening? Okay? Where am I? Identifying who the other person is. Once I know where I am, I will try and identify who I am talking to. And then identifying who you are and what kind of relationship between self and other is implied. And the fourth thing that happens is identifying why things unfold the way they do. Okay? And the reason, I'll give you an example of this. When we say identifying what the situation is, let me take an example of this very class. The situation is a classroom interaction. So, I am a teacher and anyone who is listening to this lecture, I assume, is interested in knowing more about communication or communication competence, and this is what will determine the way I teach this class. Okay? And that is one. Identifying who the other person is. I am in a classroom situation. Who is the other person? Probably a student or another faculty who is trying to assess my competence in communication or in teaching communication. I do not know who will be listening to this lecture, but that is where I am coming from. So, in addition to talking to you like students, the way I address students in class, I am also trying to constantly remind myself that this video lecture could be used to assess my ability as a teacher. So, the other person could be a senior colleague, it could be students, it could be someone in the corporate world who could be interested in learning more about communication, it could be research students, and so I have to include all those elements. The third thing, once I have identified who the other person is, identifying who you are and what kind of relationship between the self and other is implied. Now, for the most part, the purpose of these lectures is to train people who do not have access or who may have limited access to a certain quality of teaching or to certain subjects which may not be available to them very easily. Now, my relationship here is the teacher-student relationship primarily. I am not doing this for a job interview. If it gets used for a job interview, great, but I am very happy in my job, I do not have any plans to change, so big deal, you know. But if I apply for another professional opportunity within this job that requires me to present an evidence of my teaching skills, maybe, or for a promotion, maybe they might want to view this, I do not know. But still, my primary purpose of being here is teaching student. So, the relationship I am perceiving here is the teacher-student relationship. And the fourth thing is identifying why things unfold the way they do. And here, depending on what I hear myself seeing, the problem with this lecture is that there is no classroom interaction. I do not know what is going on in your mind when you listen to this lecture. So, if it were a live transmission, things would unfold in a different manner, but at this point I just have to assume the kinds of questions that could come from the audience and respond to them, and this is just a one-way communication. So, there is a lot of intrapersonal communication going on in my mind, where I have one part of my mind is acting like a student or as a listener of this presentation, okay? And that is why that is a part of the interpretive competence. Sizing up situations, knowing where I am and what the situation around me is called sizing up situations. The more we know about the particular situation in which we interact with others, the more likely we are to produce effective messages. If I know where I am, if I know what is happening around me, it is more possible, it is easily possible, or more I can understand the situation much better, and I can design messages that can get me the result I need from the environment. And this really ties in with Berlow's SMCR model and the importance of context. What is context? Context is what we find ourselves in. Context is the inter and intrapersonal environment. So, there is the intrapersonal environment, which is my attitudes, which is my beliefs, which is what I am doing, which is what I plan to do with whatever I am doing, and the interpersonal context could be the physical context, could be the relationships I have with the people in my environment, and so on and so forth. So, this sizing up situations part really ties in with that importance of context, all those factors that Berlow discussed in the model, in the SMCR model, in the context of the sender, the receiver and the channel, the components of the channel. Okay? And this is really where we start. We do it subconsciously. I don't sit here and make a list of things that are in my environment. You know, I don't sit with a pen and paper and say, okay, I am going to go into a class and let me find out how many empty chairs there are and what will go on in my mind and what direction the camera is facing. But I make a tentative, I get a tentative idea in my head about, or in my mind about, the environment that I am in. This is an empty room and I am sitting here and I am trying to talk to an audience that I have never seen, and I don't know when somebody will view this lecture, you know, if at all somebody will view this lecture and when they will view it and what kind of environment they will be in. So, I am just imagining these things, but that is making up the context, that is making up my perceptions of where the interpretation of my message will be. And depending on my understanding of the context or the physical environment of where my message possibly might be interpreted, I am trying to design my words or design my message accordingly. Okay. So, that is really what this is about, and that is where we start. According to Trenholm and Jensen, we manage our situations. Once we get an idea of what the situation is, we try and manage that situation, and in doing so, we do three main things. We identify the episode that we are in, we try and find out the script that we are supposed to use, and we try and perceive the potential consequences of following these scripts, and I will explain to you what these things mean. The first part here is orienting ourselves, which is the episode identification. Again, this is by Trenholm and Jensen. There is a very, very good article called Interpretive Competence, How We Perceive Individuals, Relationships and Social Events, from this book called Bridges and Walls. I told you I would be using this book, and this is the chapter that I am following, and this really ties in with what I am trying to do here. So, this is the title of the chapter, Interpretive Competence, How We Perceive Individuals, Relationships and Social Events, by Sarah Trenholm and Arthur Jensen, and this is on page number 170, and I am going to take a lot of what I teach today from this chapter. It is a very well researched chapter. So, according to them, when we identify an episode in the simplest form, we find out what the situation is, and in the simplest form, a situation is a place plus the definition of the place. This is a classroom, any classroom. My understanding of this classroom is that it is an empty classroom, where I have to imagine an unknown number of students. I have to imagine some faces looking at me from these empty chairs. This is a classroom where my class is going to be recorded. It is not a lecture that I can deliver and forget about. I don't do that, none of us do that, but still, you know, once you are done with the lecture, you feel okay, it is gone, and there are certain things that you can do in the next class. That is not what is happening here. This is a special kind of classroom with lights and a camera and a computer and no people, just the teacher. So, this is the situation plus the definition of the situation. That is the first part. The second part here is social episodes are internal cognitive representations about common recurring interaction routines within a defined cultural milieu. What could this mean? Think. According to Trenholm and Jensen, social episodes or social situations are internal cognitive representations, that I think about common recurring interaction routines, things that happen on a day-to-day basis. For a teacher, a recurring interaction routine is the classroom situation where the teacher talks to the students within a defined cultural milieu. So, this is a recurring situation, a recurring teaching situation within an elite, well known technical school in India. The cultural milieu is very different. This is not the University of Denver in the United States of America. That is where I got my PhD. So, it is a very different situation from the University of Denver. In the University of Denver, I could not be talking about certain things about India as freely, or not as freely, but I could not, I would need to explain the cultural things a lot more in a Western setting than I would here. So, if I talked about Diwali, I would need to first tell people what Diwali was. I would need to say it is the festival of lights and it is the triumph of good over evil, and this is what happens at Diwali. And here I say Diwali, and the picture comes into the minds of all the Indian students about all these diyas lighting up, lots of sweets, a holiday, national holiday, break from work. At IIT, Diwali signifies the illumination and Rangoli festivals, which are a big thing. People outside of this cultural setting don't know what I am talking about. So, this is a recurring phenomenon. Within IIT, it is a very common thing. But when I came here the first time, they said we have an Ilu festival. I said, Ilu festival, what is that supposed to mean? Everybody who had been at IIT for a while understood that the word Ilu was a short form of illumination competition, which is this magnificent competition where the students meticulously arrange the diyas or the earthen lamps. Now, I use the word diya and most Indians can understand what I am referring to. But since this lecture could be heard by somebody outside of India, I will have to explain that a diya is an earthen lamp, and the students meticulously arrange the earthen lamps in the form of pictures, and these pictures, and then they are assessed on the on various things, on the creativity, on how fast they do things and all that stuff. I use the word Rangoli and people in India understand what Rangoli is all about. But anyone outside of India or anyone who has never heard the term, probably in a Western country, I will have to explain that Rangoli is a form of floor decoration, where we use mostly natural colors to make these traditional designs on the floor to welcome the gods and goddesses into our homes, to welcome the good in our environments, and that is what Diwali is all about, and lots of sweets to celebrate this happy festival. So, this is a recurring thing for us. For us, the word Diwali, Diya, Rangoli, everything is just a common part of our routine, and we, going back to this point, it is a social episode, and the internal cognitive representation, I know that Diwali means this. Now, in an Indian setting, let me come back to this example of this class. I have an internal cognitive representation, I have an understanding of what this classroom is and how this classroom is different from the regular classroom that I teach my classes in. Okay. The social interaction here is a continuous dance. Social interaction is a continuous dance in which participants accept and decline each other's invitations to enact different episodes. An episode is an enactment of the situation, what I do in a situation, and social interaction is this constant exchange of messages in which the different participants accept and decline each other's invitations to participate in that episode. How I respond to you, whether I want to be in your comfort zone or not, whether I want to respond to your message or not. If I want to respond to your message, what do I do? How do I take it to the next level? All that is included in social interaction. The second part of this is using scripts to guide interaction. According to Trenholm and Jensen, a script is a highly predictable sequence of events. The word script, you must have heard. All these famous actors and actresses get these scripts for the movies. People who are in the media get a script for what they need to say when the camera is on. I don't get a script. I'm talking to a camera, but I don't get a script. But I have my own script. Okay? So, I know that I have to go by the slides. There is some openness. I can innovate, I can improvise when I am talking to the camera, but for the most part it is impromptu. Okay. So, this is a highly predictable sequence of events. I know what is coming next, and this is a script. Closed episodes are when a situation is almost completely scripted. For example, a performance evaluation. Your boss calls you once in 6 months, once a year, asks you, what have you done? What did you promise to do? What have you been able to achieve? What have you not been able to achieve? Why? What can I do to help you? Or when will you get back on track if you have not been on track so far? And what are the consequences? So, it is pretty much scripted. The entrance exams, they are timed down to the last minute. I don't know how many of you have sat for the entrance exam for IIT, the joint entrance examination for IIT, or the civil services entrance examination, or the GRE, graduate record examination, or the graduate management aptitude test, or the combined aptitude test for admission to the Indian Institutes of Management. So, all these are very, very scripted. You know, once the bell rings, then it's like people are robots and they are following this set of instructions, and you are going by the minute, and they don't care who you are and what your problem is, but it's like there is a solution for every problem which is by the book. And so, it's a very scripted, very well defined set of instructions that people follow, and that's a closed episode. You know that those 3 hours, every minute, whatever you do, how you write the exam is your problem, but as far as the people there are concerned, they know exactly what needs to be done. Okay? Now, on the other hand, we have open episodes, and open episodes are episodes when participants enter a situation without any preconceived plan or with a very, very general plan. For example, a job interview. A job interview is actually not very open. Your team meetings are open. Your social events are absolutely open. Boss has called you for say a promotion party, and you go there, and you know that the first thing you will do is go and say hello to everyone you know, and then you will probably be served some drinks and snacks, but it is all wide open. What you do, who you talk to, what order you talk to them in, nobody knows. Your social functions at home, completely open ended. So, these are the scripts. Our notions of these scripts guide how we interact in these situations. In closed episodes, there is a certain set of instructions we follow, and we know that the episode will end, and we are very comfortable with that. In an open episode, we just go in and we modify our interactions as we go in. Our interactions are not practiced. In a closed episode, our interactions are more or less practiced. So, if one party has a set of instructions and the other party knows what that set of instructions is, the receiver of the message also has a very closed idea or a closed method of responding to this very, very strict set of instructions. In an open episode, the receiver of the message also adapts to the situation. So, it is a mutual flow of messages, of meanings, of perceptions, and that is why we say that the communication depends upon both sender and receiver. One person cannot determine what happens. One person is in no position to determine what happens next. Everything is dependent on the other person. Sizing up people is the next thing. Now, when we size up people, we try and find out what people are and or what we perceive them to be. And to do that, we do four things. We use personal constructs, we have an implicit personality theory, and we have self-fulfilling prophecies, and lastly we have cognitive complexity. Let us see what each of these things are. We use personal constructs to judge others. Personal constructs are mental yardsticks for evaluating objects, events and people. They are the ideas we have in our minds that we use to judge people. Since constructs are personal, no two people will use them exactly in the same manner. Okay? We call them personal constructs. These are judgments we make about people based on our perceptions. Some personal constructs we use according to Duck 1976, in Trenholm and Jensen 2002, we have 4 kinds of personal constructs and we follow this order while assessing a person. The first thing we tend to assess or judge a person on is the physical attributes. Tall, short, beautiful, ugly, fair, dark, big eyes, small eyes, big hands, small hands, large feet, small feet, okay, stocky, fat, thin, all those things. So, the physical attributes of a person. Then depending on these physical attributes we have, and these physical attributes can also include the artifacts, what the person is carrying, what you see in the first go, loud voice, soft voice, polite, okay, not polite, but I mean loud voice, soft voice, and based on that then we go on to the role constructs. So, role constructs are, if I am standing here and talking to you, how do you perceive me? Do you perceive me as a teacher? Do you perceive me as an unsure student who's, or as a new teacher, or as an experienced teacher? Do you perceive me as a researcher? Do you perceive me as a student who's just trying to get into the teaching profession? So, what is my role here? What is your role and what is my role? So, we have these role constructs. Who am I in relation to this person that I am talking to? Okay? And then once we have established the role construct, the person looks like this and I am X in relation to this person, then we move on to the third type of construct, which is the interaction construct. So, so and so is a friendly, tall teacher. So, what my interpretation of the person's behavior is depending upon my interaction. This comes in after I have interacted with the person for a little while, okay, and the interaction constructs come in: friendly or hostile, polite or rude, warm-hearted or aggressive, or not very aggressive, or meek. So, all those things will come up after we have had some interaction with the person. The fourth kind of construct is the psychological construct, and this is the assumption we make about the general personality of the person. Is the person motivated? Is the person aggressive? Is the person lazy? Is the person kind? Is the person cruel? So, these are the assumptions we make about the personality of the person, and this is the order we proceed in, although subconsciously. Implicit personality theory is the belief on our part that certain individual traits are related to other traits. So, if we observe a trait that we think is a part of a cluster, we will assume that the person also has the rest of the traits in that cluster. For example, if an Indian woman has long hair, we just see the person's hair from behind, thin, long hair, she must be beautiful. Long dark hair, she must be using coconut oil or mustard oil. She's always had long hair. It could be artificial hair, we don't know, but we just immediately make an assumption. If she has long hair, she must be beautiful. And then we look at the other attributes of the person and we are like, no, no, she's a show off. She's just trying to show off her hair. The rest of her may not be so good looking, but then we create these assumptions in our mind. if so and so is well educated, she must be polite. Not always true. Or if the person is talking about or is expressing his or her expertise in some area, some people may not like it very much and say, well, you know, this person is just trying to brag. Or on the other hand, some people could take that person to be brilliant. If I am talking to you about communication and you like what I am saying, you could just make an assumption. I hope you do actually. But you could just make an assumption that, my God, she knows about this, so she must be knowing about everything else related to communication according to your perception of communication. Okay? Or all teachers at all teachers not teaching in IIT are not so brilliant. We have that assumption. I mean, or people just make that assumption that if you've not been able to do your degree at a school like IIT or NIT, maybe you aren't that smart. That's not true. That's really not true. It's just a matter of who got the opportunity. But we make those assumptions. Okay? So, if a person is a civil servant, the person must be brilliant because the person has cleared the civil services examination. Many times we make our notions, we make these notions without any first hand experience. The next slide here is interpersonal self-fulfilling prophecies. Okay, we make these notions about the implicit personality, and then we also have these interpersonal self-fulfilling prophecies. These prophecies start when one person, the observer, starts believing something to be true about another person who is the target and begins acting towards the target as if the belief were fact. This action prompts the target to behave in line with the observer's expectations. Please read this once. Let's read this once again. This starts when one person, the observer, believing something to be true about another person, the target, begins acting towards the target as if the belief were fact. This action prompts the target to behave in line with the observer's expectations. This, for example, the "you can do it because you studied at such a reputed institute" line used to motivate the employees, or your teachers telling you, you can do it, you are brilliant, your parents telling you, you are great, you have it in you, and you start believing that, and that takes you to great heights. Okay? So, we start believing in whatever people tell us about ourselves, and when we start believing in these things, we start acting according to them. We start pushing ourselves to reach those great heights. We start pushing ourselves to do what is expected of you. In India, I have seen this happening in a lot of families, and it's really nice that our parents push us so much. And you know, since we are kids, we are told, you are coming from this family, you are a good kid. You're a very good child. You're a very well-behaved child. You belong to this family, you have to be a well-behaved child. So, all those things are constantly fed into our minds, and our definition of good is shaped by the definitions of morality we get from our parents and from our teachers. So, we start acting according to those notions, and it's really nice because these things help us live up to the expectations they have set for us, which really push us towards doing something better than what we had imagined. If we were just left on our own, we may not be able to achieve all that. But these expectations, these constant inputs that we get from our environment, even if we fail, our teachers and our parents tell us, no, it doesn't matter. You failed, no problem. You'll get up and start running. All great people fail. Nobody believed Einstein when he gave E equals mc squared. People thought he was trying to challenge Newton. So, nobody believed him, but see how popular, how well respected he is in the world of physics now. So, you know, people will give you such examples and you feel maybe it's not so bad, and that really helps you get out of this depression sometimes, or just lack of motivation. It just motivates you, it gives you a reason to move on, and this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and it really works in your favor. And this, I mean, you know, some people will assume good things about us no matter what. They get one small idea about us and they start assuming good things about us, and that will take us to great heights, and that is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that is how we judge people. We see one thing and we put them into a category. Our parents say, okay, you are my child, you have to behave in this manner, you have to be polite to your elders, you have to be warm to your the people younger to you, you have to be respectful to your teachers, you have to do well at school, and you start believing those things about yourself. And once you start believing them about yourself, you start working according to them, and you start actually expressing what has been expected of you. Cognitive complexity. Cognitive complexity is factors affecting impression formation. A cognitively complex person's system is greater in the number of personal constructs. So, if a cognitively complex person will have a larger number of personal constructs about people. So, the person will not classify people into short or tall, could be average, could be slightly below average, okay, could be classifying people according to the state they are coming from. Well, maybe mountain people, according to the people living in mountains, this is the average height, but according to the people living in plains, this is the average height. As from a Caucasian's point of view, you are short, but from a North Indian's point of view, you are tall. So, all those differentiations, specialized contextual constructs come in, and that is called differentiation. And a cognitively complex person's system is greater, has a larger number of personal constructs, which means there is a larger amount of, or a greater amount of differentiation, and it includes more abstract psychological categories and has more elaborate ways of relating various constructs. So, not only is a cognitively complex person able to see things in their own contexts, the person is also abstract these constructs, or look at the abstractions of these constructs and integrate these abstractions into a complex whole and situate it contextually. Okay? As opposed to this, a cognitively simple person has fewer, lesser abstract constructs about people and views those constructs as relatively isolated impressions. It is either black or white, there are no grey areas. Okay? And that is the way I feel, and that is the way the world is. And that is what people who are not so cognitively complex feel, and it is okay. Okay? Research has shown that cognitively complex persons are more accurate in processing information about others, they are better at placing themselves in the role of the other person, and they are more patient in weighing most of the evidence before formulating a complete impression. So, research has demonstrated that a person who is more cognitively complex is able to view people, has a better ability to view people in their specific contexts and situates them contextually, okay, before the complete impression is formed. As opposed to this, the less complex individuals tend to either stick with their original impression and ignore contradictory information, or they tend to change the impression to fit the most recent information they have. So, what they do is they say, no, I have believed this about this person, and if the person is good, the person will be good throughout his life. Okay? And some vague incident does not mean the person is not good. Okay? Or if there is glaring evidence that the person has done something unethical, then they immediately change their stance and they say, okay, I believed the person to be good, now the person is bad. So, you know, there is no contextual information attached, it is just slotting people into different categories. Now, what I want you to start thinking about is the implications of these scripts and preconceived notions on interpersonal interactions, especially at work. Let us move on to the third part that Trenholm and Jensen talk about, and that is sizing up relationships. And in this, what we do is self-monitoring. When we size up relationships, when we try and find out what our relationships are with our environment, what we really do is monitor ourselves. Self-monitoring is deciding who to be. Okay? Just as we form impressions of others, we form and present images of ourselves to the others. We not only size up others, we also size up our relationships with them. We also try and find out what our relationship is with our environment. The awareness of images of self and the ability to adapt these images to the situation at hand has been referred to as self-monitoring. Okay? So, just as we form impressions of others, we also monitor ourselves, and our ability to adapt these images to the situation at hand is referred to as self-monitoring. High and low self-monitors. The high self-monitor asks, who does this situation want me to be and how can I be that person? A person who is high on self-monitoring, a person who tries to monitor his own behavior according to the environment, his or her own behavior, asks what the situation is like and what does the situation need me to be and how can I be that person, how can I fit in, and inherently asks himself, what can I do so that my own perception of myself doesn't change but I still fit in. Okay? In so doing, the high self-monitoring individual reads the character of the situation to identify the type of person called for by that type of situation, constructs a mental image or representation of a person who best exemplifies that type of person, finds out what the situation needs, then constructs a mental image of the kind of person who would fit best into that situation, and uses the prototypic person's self-presentation and expressive behavior as a set of guidelines for monitoring his or her own verbal and non-verbal actions. The high self-monitoring individual really takes this image of the perfect fit, a person who could be the perfect fit in that particular situation, and then modifies his or her behavior according to what he or she perceives to be the perfect fit, brings about those changes in her or his or her own self-presentation. What should I look like, what should I behave like, or how should I behave, and then those set of guidelines are decided by a high self-monitoring person. Nobody is helping him. Sometimes the person may seek help, but usually this is done on his or her own, or at least the motivation to get help comes really from inside, and the person takes these set of guidelines and starts acting according to these guidelines to fit in well with the situation. The low self-monitor asks, who am I and how can I be me in this situation? What can I do to not let go of myself? So, you see, either of these is not bad. I just want you to start realizing that none of these things are right or wrong. We are just different people. Some people behave differently than others, and a high self-monitor may not be a high self-monitor in all situations. There are certain things that we will do no matter what, and there are certain things that we will not do no matter what. I will give you a small example. I made a special request to stand and teach this class. That is where my low self-monitoring comes in. I will not adapt myself because I feel uncomfortable when I sit down and teach. My natural style of teaching is standing and teaching. So, I made a request to allow me to stand and teach, but I can't have students here. So, I have to change my style of teaching in such a manner so that if you are listening to this lecture, you feel as if I am talking to you. Okay, I am not getting anything from you. I am just assuming in my mind. When I pause, I am really hoping that you will start thinking and you will want to ask me questions. I am just hoping that. Even though that is not coming, I am adapting my style accordingly, because this has to look like a real classroom situation. I could have very easily just written down every lecture and stood here and started reading out, but that is not really the case. So, that is what this is all about. We can be high self monitors in one situation, and in the other situation we become low self monitors, and we switch, and that is okay. This high self monitoring is really adaptability, and that is what I want to talk to you about. Research demonstrates that being adaptable, being a high self monitor, is one of the keys to social success. We really need to learn to adapt to situations. I am not saying you must give up your natural style. I am not saying you must fit in with every situation. No, please, by all means, retain your individuality. But wherever it is possible to adapt without letting go of yourself, it just might be a good idea. But you have to assess that situation. That is why I am not going to give you any patches. I didn't say that. If you read this sentence carefully, it says research demonstrates. I am not giving you any patchwork. I am not giving you any solution. I am not giving you any suggestion. It's the research that shows that if you are adaptable, it could contribute to your social success. Okay? Defining relationships, self in relation to others. The feedback from our environment helps us situate ourselves in our own unique environments, and this in turn defines our perceptions about the stimuli coming from that environment after we have situated ourselves in it. Today's lecture is really going to confuse you, I think, because I am just giving you all these abstract things, but just think and try and apply whatever I am telling you. What we get from our environment helps us situate ourselves in the environment, helps us find out where we are in our environment, and this in turn defines our perception about what the environment is like, what kinds of stimuli to expect from our environment after we have situated ourselves in it. So, when I came here, I said, okay, I am a non-Bengali, and then I got these very friendly feelers from the environment, and I met other non-Bengalis who said that this is a very friendly place to be in, and you will get used to food here. So, I do not eat fish, and they said, no, you will find food. There are lots of people here in Bengal who do not eat fish, non-Bengalis who live here, and they are doing quite well, and you will get used to the culture here because people are really, really friendly. So, when I was new, when I joined this place initially, I was a little uncomfortable. I said, new place, lots of Bengali names in the directory, what do I do? But then slowly, with the friendliness that came to me from the environment, I adjusted and I became more relaxed, and I realized that I was not an outsider. When I came here, I felt I was an outsider. It was natural. Everybody around me talking in Bengali or Odia, it was not everybody, but many people. But when I got these friendly feelers, I realized, well, maybe no, I am not an outsider. I am also a part of this environment. And then I slowly started sending out signals as a part of the environment. And that is really what this is all about. This is the last slide for today's lecture. We have a master contract. The master contract is the worked out definition of a relationship that guides the recurring interaction of any dyad. Now, I want you to start thinking about it. I will discuss the slide again in the next lecture, but today I want you to start thinking about all of these points. This means that as our relationships develop, perceptions that were originally guided by a prototype eventually give way to an understanding based on verbalized agreements or silent acceptance of established patterns of behavior. Okay? So, this is a worked out definition. This is something that we construct socially, and this means that our relations, as our relationships move along, the perceptions that we had that were originally guided by a prototype that were originally determined by our perception of what something should be like eventually gives way to an understanding based on the verbalized agreements, based on what we get from our based on what people say that they agree to about us, or silent acceptance of established patterns of behavior. Okay? It is also important to recognize that identifying what type of relationship you are involved in may be just as crucial as knowing the situation or forming a useful impression of the other. So, that is what this really is all about. I want you to think about these points and ponder over them, and we will discuss these points in the next class. And I also want you to think about how these things will help you determine the how these points really contribute to your understanding of international business communication and intercultural communication as part of international business communication. Thank you.